Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Mercedes believe that Red Bull are in danger to retain their title next season, not just due to the 10% reduction in testing time for Red Bull over the next 12 months, but also Mercedes understand their car far better now, where it went wrong, what they can do in the future, and believe they'll get back to the top. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to dive into today. First of all, this from Mick Schumacher and Toto Wolff. Basically, they want him to be their reserve driver. It's kind of clear at this point that they want Mick Schumacher to come to Mercedes. Toto Wolff has said this an awful lot lately, really, that look, he's close to our hearts, want to look after him, the Schumacher family is part of Mercedes, all this type of stuff, and even going on to say, yeah, he just fits, it makes a lot of sense. So whether Mick Schumacher has any better offers than this, he could go drive elsewhere in another series or something, but yeah, historically, being part of that team might be a good idea. It could well get a seat, helped by Mercedes onto the grid at some other point in the future, and who knows how long Hamilton stays around. If he wins the title next year, will he keep going? Will he call it a day? I don't know. Who's going to step into that seat? Could it be Charles Leclerc? That's one question, just because Ferrari are definitely concerned about a potential Leclerc to potentially Mercedes or even Red Bull move, just because Perez's seat is not safe, let's say, especially because they've brought Riccardo in. Like, they're not saying to Perez, look, mate, be on your best behavior or you're gone, but yeah, I'm sure Perez is thinking with Riccardo back on the team as the third driver, like, okay, I've got to really be on, my good boy mode for team principal Max Verstappen. It will just deliver the goods, right? And just could do a good performance, because in terms of quali pace and race pace this season, that was one of the wider gaps in the entire grid was Verstappen Perez, and that does cause Red Bull issues if Mercedes and Ferrari have competitive cars up there with Max at the front, and both of their drivers are performing better than Perez is, then that creates a serious issue for Red Bull in terms of strategy and qualification positions and all this type of stuff. But still, Leclerc to potentially Red Bull or Mercedes could be a possibility in the future if the Scuderia don't deliver, and they want to try and ensure this year that that his contract gets extended. Whether Leclerc will do that, look, every time he gets interviewed, he says, yeah, I love Ferrari, I really want to win for this team. Sure, that's true, but if they keep failing to deliver and the frustrations he's had seemingly with Mattia Binotto, then, you can't exactly blame him for wanting to leave if the time comes. So they're going to try and lock him down for a little bit longer. Let's talk about some key issue that the Red Bull team might have. Mercedes certainly believe this is going to bite Red Bull next season, the 10% reduction in testing time. That puts them down to the following. So the testing time in terms of the wind tunnel stuff is considered in terms of the amount of runs you get for, I guess, a certain amount of time in the wind tunnel. So, I think if you're like 7th or something in the classification, you get 100% of the allowance. And if you're less or more than that, then you get a percentage of that. So Ferrari get 240 runs in the wind tunnel. Mercedes get 256 runs. I believe Red Bull would get 220-ish, but that goes down to 202 with that 10% reduction. So that's a pretty big deal. That means Mercedes get about 27% more testing time in the wind tunnel than Red Bull do. And it should mean, as Toto Wolff goes on to say, it means that, the teams that are further back should be able to make a big jump. Like Williams, for example, have about twice the testing time, and they have like almost 400 runs, I believe, in the wind tunnel, which is practically double what Red Bull get. Does it mean they're going to gain like 2 seconds in lap time? Probably not, but it should theoretically help close up the grid over time. Toto Wolff restrains from completely saying, yes, we are going to utilize this advantage. We are going to just dominate the scene because we get this extra little bit of, testing time, of course, but still, it's a pretty big deal, and it certainly will hurt Red Bull next season more than it potentially already has to their reputation after all the drama over the last couple of months. So look, Mercedes obviously have this advantage over Red Bull and Ferrari for the first time since this has been a thing, right? Because over the last 12, 18 months or whatever, since this has kind of come into effect, Mercedes have been number one, and therefore, over time, they get more testing time. It's a cool idea from the FIA. Whether it actually works to equalize the grid, I don't know, but of course, it should be a penalty to Red Bull for sure. Let's talk about Mercedes and how they kind of diagnose their weekends back in Abu Dhabi. Far from the best, but actually, they were quite happy that they were poor in Abu Dhabi, just because their table of doom, we'll see here in a second, as James Vols describes, basically they've got an algorithm, a piece of software that can tell them how good they'll be, look at the information on the track, the altitude, the conditions, the type of corners, analyze how their car should perform at that particular circuit, and tell them how good they'll be. Their information told them Mexico would be their best track, basically. Brazil would be right up there as well. They would be by far their most competitive tracks, and then the algorithm told them, yeah, Abu Dhabi, it's not looking good. You guys, even with the new update, the straight line speed, the type of corners, the circuit characteristics didn't suit the Mercedes. So, they were hoping to do better than they did, but they're actually kind of glad in a weird way that their car didn't work, just so that they know that what they understand about the car actually aligns with what they believe like the car actually should behave as, and therefore they can take that understanding into next season. Before we get to that point though, of course they did the debrief after Abu Dhabi, discussing many things such as the incident with Sainz. They actually believe that incident with Sainz did not cause the retirement, wasn't even related, was just a separate hydraulic issue, and the incident didn't actually cause that much damage. Hamilton said it shifted forward the balance, and they had to fix that by changing the wing angle at the pit stop, which is where he got a lot faster after the first pit stop. But the interesting point here to me is kind of the confidence going forward, discussing the team and the teamwork and the character building that they've had to do over this season, believing that their understanding now and over the winter periods means they know pretty much all of their weaknesses from this season and where they need to fix them. Yes, they're still behind Red Bull, but they do have that advantage in testing time that we saw.
This team had to pull closer together than really ever before. It's very easy in these circumstances, in these difficult times, to pull apart, and we didn't. The drivers pulled together, and I'm confident we have the best driver lineup on the grid. We have two incredible drivers pushing each other, but working as a team to make the car better. We have a team both in Brixworth and in Brackley and at the track as well, all working together with just one goal in mind. And that's not to win anymore necessarily, it's to make sure we understand the package we have so that we're back to our winning ways next year. I don't think you can truly now, or even across the winter, state that we know everything about the W13. We clearly across the year, every time we learned something, discovered a whole series of new items that really we had to learn, understand and develop very quickly. But if you compare where we were, not so much in Bahrain we were actually fairly competitive after testing there, but I would definitely say Melbourne, Imola, that first little sequence of the year, at tracks that are normal tracks, for want of a better word, and then compare where we were after the Austin update, the final update of the year that we bought it, so that's Austin, Mexico, Brazil and Abu Dhabi. Yeah, there's some ups and downs, very much so, and that's a part of what I meant by this car has items that we believe we understand and some of them that's still not fully explained as a result of that. But if you look at the direction moving forward, the gaps to the front, especially on race pace, we made huge amounts of progress. And you only do that by understanding where your problems are, working on them and working as a team. Is it enough to win next year, which is really where that question goes? The confidence we have is that we now have our tools, our wind tunnel tools, our development tools, our performance tools here in the organisation, producing performance which is more than our competitors. It's allowing us to move further forward relative to them. There's still a void though, and Abu Dhabi really showed that. That has to be caught up across the winter, and I think we have a very good process and system in place to do that. That development that you saw across the season will continue across the winter. And I think we'll be in a very strong place next year.
So as the quote from James Voles went there, Valtteri, it's James Guy, as I like to say every time he comes into the equation here. I think we'll be in a very strong place next year, continue across the winter, that development across the season. So Mercedes made great progress, but as he will go on to say here in a second, I'll share the second part of that clip about the kind of, what do you call it, the table of doom, right, which would tell them how they would achieve. And yeah, they knew that Abu Dhabi wasn't going to be so good. But interesting to note, right, because they brought that Austin update, looked quite good in Austin, bar the straight line speeds. Then Mexico and Brazil, they were just very competitive really all weekend long, if not for the strategy that worked, the soft medium strategy for Max Verstappen in Mexico, then maybe Mercedes can get a win there. And of course in Brazil, the win was on for Hamilton, but for the instance again with Verstappen after the safety car restart, which kind of took his chances away after the small damage he occurred or had to his car in that particular race. So yeah, will Mercedes be competitive? The thing to me is this wind tunnel testing time reduction won't probably do that much now. It's going to be a more long-term effect that it has over the next 12 months, probably won't be immediately apparent.
I think you've probably heard Toto refer to the table of doom. So this is something we constructed internally that allows us to somewhat predict where our car will be relative to certainly the fastest cars track on track. And it worked fairly well. It's something that actually had fairly good correlation across the season. And it did say that in, for example, Mexico and Brazil, we would be significantly more competitive than we were going to be in Abu Dhabi. And it's a function of the properties that make our car both strong and weak. And that transpired to be true. And as perhaps negative as that comes across, that's a very good thing, because it means that the properties of our car that we understand, we actually have a good grasp on them, sufficiently so that they actually look to be real in real life, and then the reasons behind it look to be correlated.
But this was a key point for Mercedes. They raised pretty much all season long about the fact that they didn't really understand whether their car was going to respond well or not. They were trying all these things largely on Hamilton's car at the start of the season, and whatever they tried, most of it didn't work, and they probably couldn't understand exactly why. And then as time progressed, I think they brought the Silverstone update, or they brought some things to Silverstone or maybe Austria, and they were like, hang on a second, that actually did what we thought it would do, which is a surprise to them, right? They were like, okay, maybe we actually understand this car now, and the idea that they can plug in their car to the machine, and the machine kind of says what actually happens in reality is a good sign for them, because the start of the season, they had some serious kind of issues with what it said it would do from the wind tunnel and the simulation was not what the car actually did. Like we heard before the season began that this new kind of, in the testing that they'd done in the simulator, this car with the no side pod design was like a second a lap quicker than the previous model was with the wider side pods they tested in Barcelona back in February. So, the simulator told them it was a second lap faster. Clearly it wasn't, or where they thought it would be, and that was really the key issue they had to address all season long to make sure like their simulator aligns with the reality. They might have now achieved that under the new regulations, and yes, there are some small tweaks to the regs next year, but it should be Mercedes who are in a decent position to push on, but I still don't think they'll be quite as competitive as Red Bull at the start of the next season, because Red Bull obviously have the big advantage of having the dominant car and also being able to switch off for the latter half of the season after locking up both championships very early on. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.